Good evening, friends, and welcome to this plenary session with the co-chairs of the GrowthNet 2014, who will help set the priorities for all of us in terms of the global scenario currently, as well as the outlook. I am very pleased to chair this session in the company of 5 distinguished business leaders, and at a later stage, I may add a few thoughts. Stanley Bergman, Chairman and CEO Henry Schein Company USA, a Fortune 500 company with global interests. Stanley straddles 3 continents, and our entire panel has a lot of international experiences. Ms. Canan Celebi, Vice Chair, Celebi Holding of Turkey, whose company makes international travel efficient and smooth. Mr. Ronnie Chan, Chairman Hang Lung Properties Limited, Hong Kong, Chairman of Asia Society, New York, wears many hats. Wendy Luhabi runs a private equity firm with a very special twist. She invests in companies owned by women. Mr. Ramadurai, Vice Chairman, Tata Consultancy Services, and Chairman of Tata Sikorsky and Tata Air Asia, is also an advisor to the Prime Minister of India, and he also has a lot of international experience. Altogether, we have a very diverse group of co-chairs. And this session is to get their views on the global perspectives, the challenges they see, and hopefully some optimism as well, some clues as to the way forward, what we should be doing. The last few years have been a truly roller coaster ride with several financial crises, big geopolitical turning points, the waning of American power to some extent, the rise of new countries such as China, and this is a very difficult global situation. I would like to request Stan Bergman to start off and give us his perspective on the global situation.
Thank you, Mr. Goodrich, and good evening, everyone. As I was flying over here on the Air India flight, and I might tell you, we took off on time, and we landed on time, and the food was great. I was thinking, when I have to make a major decision, my company has 17,000 people. We're the largest provider of dental, medical, and veterinary products to office-based practitioners. I don't have to get involved in that many decisions because we've got a great executive team. But when something ends up on my desk, it usually involves major risk. And I was thinking on the way over, to me, the number one issue when it comes to major risk is the geopolitical environment. I say to myself, we're going to invest in this country, that country. We're even going to invest further in the United States. What's going to happen? What's going to happen in 3 months' time, 6 months, 9 months? I attend the World Economic Forum, and I'm an accountant by background, and I take an inventory of the world once a year. In January of 2009, it was a very dismal place. And I think probably in another decade, we'll know how close we came to not the Great Recession, but another depression. We were this close. Banks did not trust each other for about a 2 or 3 week period. When I compare that to the World Economic Forum of January of 2014, I see a different world. I see optimism, I see opportunity for growth, and in fact, I see a lot of excitement. The challenge I think we have in business is that markets tend to overreact one way or the other. They tend to say things are worse, or they tend to say things are better. I think, as we sit here today, the world is in a recovery mode. It's not as fast as we want. There's a lot of debt on country books. We have to work that through, but we're in a good place. I think even Europe is starting to move. Yes, there are countries that have challenges. My biggest concern is the latent tinderbox that we may face on the international side. whether it's the situation with respect to Iran, I don't think Iran's going to be able to deliver an atomic weapon without a big challenge and a destabilizer in the world. Or whether it's what happened in Ukraine and Crimea just 2 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, I'm not sure how many of us read anything on Ukraine in the newspaper. Well, today it's important. The international markets did not react, the Russian market did. My concern is what happens to this worldwide economy that is moving along. Yes, the developing world is pretty upset about 2009 because the developing world was doing well, and we upset the apple cart, not because the developing world did anything wrong. But my concern is what happens if one of these areas of instability causes us a problem and puts the world into an economic slide. That's the number one issue I deal with. The number two issue I deal with is government. And to be sure, I am on the left, personally. But governments in the world assume that business people are just bad, that we want to do something bad. Now, the 2009 challenges, or actually what happened in September of 2008, was not because all businesses were bad and not because there was no good legislation on the books. It's because there was not good oversight over some bad business people. And just like there are good doctors and bad doctors, there are good lawyers and bad lawyers, there are good accountants, bad accountants, there are good business people and bad people. There is nothing wrong with ethical capitalism. It works. And I would submit to you that most business people in general are ethical. My concern is with the superabundance of legislation that is passed everywhere. In India, it's not about passing legislation, it's about bringing down legislation that inhibits trade. So I would say to you the two things, Mr. Goodrich, that really concern me when I make a business decision are the potential instability, not of the world economies, which are going in a good direction, but something that could ignite that switch. And my concern is with the notion that governments throughout the world assume that business is guilty to start with and are not promoting trade. Governments want to promote trade. They want to do all sorts of things. Business is not about giving a tax rebate. That's good. We like that. It's not about a subsidy for labor. We just need the ability to do business and not have bureaucrats hold us up with licensing or electric connection or whatever it is. And I would say to you, those are the two things that bother me. Now, if there's time, I'll tell you why I'm so optimistic about the world, but there's got to be something for the follow-on.
Thank you, Stan. It's good that you're optimistic, and I agree with you that these are two very big issues. If we can have Canan next.
Yes, thank you very much. Just one second. I think you can hear me right now. Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Actually, it is really a big honor for me to be here.
Canan, if you can take this closer to you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not a technological person, as I can show right now. Yes, thank you very much again. I'm from Turkey, Istanbul, but actually I call myself also half Indian. When actually I was invited here, I heard that people are expecting me to talk about Turkey. But I follow more actually India than Turkey because we are a very old company in our business in aviation. At the moment, we have almost 5,000 people working for us in Turkey in aviation side. But at the moment, we have 6,000 people working us in India for aviation. So we have also some other countries in the Europe, but what I can say, we feel our future mostly in India at the moment, and also some other emerging countries, as you have mentioned. That's why actually Turkey is very important still, of course, as this is our home base. But it's an opportunity-wise for our group. Really, the future is outside of Turkey, because we have already almost 60% of the capacity in the market in Turkey. So there is not much big growth enough for us, even though Turkey as a country, for I think all foreign investors, is a big opportunity country, because it's a really fast growing, and economically last 5 years is very stabilized, and also the financial institutes are very strong at the moment, even though the Europe was collapsing in some way. So if you look from the foreign investor perspective, of course Turkey, as my country, is a very good opportunity country for any foreign investor. Although, of course, there are some turmoils going on at the moment in Turkey. That's why we don't know about, of course, very short term how the things will develop. But as being a Turkish actually company, if I come back to the subject, we were always since 55 years our company old, and I'm in this position since 30 years, because we lost our father when I was 16, so we had to take over the company in 1982. So since then, we are in the business with my brother. So we were facing all the actually experience what it has been through in Turkey since 1982, which means instability and a lot of coalition government. So a lot of changes in 2 to 3 years, sometimes in 1 year time. It meant, of course, very different political decisions every 2 years. So there was no long-term, actually, planning was able to do in your business or in other business. Economically also, it was a very big changes in 1 to 2 years' time. So what it gave us actually as a company, when we decided to go out of Turkey around 1996, it was our decision to be more in the different countries. We realized that we had a quite big experience in our own country by actually fighting with the instability or waiting for the government to decide something, or actually sudden changes in the environment. These were actually our experience and strengths of the group, which was the best, I think, strength you could have if you like to go to emerging market. So whenever we decided to come actually India, for example, lots of people from Turkey and as well as some other countries, they said it's a quite difficult country. How come you dare to go and invest that country? Nothing you can know in how many years, in how many days it is going to be realized. And you can never be sure about any decision from the government, because there were already some big global companies were in India for our sector, and they were a little bit tied up with their decision, but at the same time they were hesitating to continue. But what we said, actually, if you like to have the big opportunity, you should be able to deal with these issues. Otherwise, none of the countries has a big opportunity if everything is so stabilized, everything is well prepared, all the legislation is gone. So who is inviting you to this type of countries? I mean, you have to be there when the things are developing, when things are settling down, you have to take that risk. I mean, otherwise, you should go to Europe with no margin companies. I mean, if you go to Europe in our business, that's the possibility. But again, in our business, the margins to grant ending sector is 2 to 3%. When you come to India, you can find 20%. And this was the actually very obvious thing for us. But luckily, as I said, because we are from Turkey, we say ourselves half Europe, half Asia. So many things, what was happening in India when we arrived, it was about 2005 actually, first time I came to India. And we waited until 2009 to have our first business investment, because there were lots of bidding process started, cancelled. But this was very typical Turkey after 1980s. We had the same experience in Turkey. So anyway, at the moment, as we have started in India, we are, for example, very happy. At the moment, our main actually targeted area is Africa and some Middle East countries. Of course, these are also for us, for our sector, and I'm sure most of the sectors in this type of emerging market, these countries has the potential for foreigners to invest because things are not developed yet. But especially in our sector, there is not many opportunities because generally you can have 1 or 2, maximum 3 companies in one airport. You cannot have 10 companies in one airport. And generally, again, all the countries, of course, if they have an airport, if they have an airline, they have already at least one their own companies who is serving in this sector. So that actually for us as aviation companies, I'm not talking about airline, but the service side of aviation, the terminals or ground handling or some other services, there is only 1 or maximum 2 companies has a chance to go in and to serve there. If you actually miss that chance, then you have to forget about that country or that airport. That's why you have to be in the country very early, because also our business is very much humanly oriented business. So it is not very easy to go and start something because you need to learn this country's culture, how to handle the people, how to train them. Because even though it seems very simple business we are doing, we are serving to the airline. So some people think that maybe it is just loading and offloading baggage, so it's like a baggage handler. But actually it's very sophisticated service we need to give. I mean, the security of the aircraft is actually depend on the ground handling company. That's why you need to have a high-profile people and also low-profile people. But both of them need to be trained because you cannot get this actually education easily from the schools or universities. So we need to really train the people as well. So what I can say, globalization aspect is our must as our sector and company. But where to go and how to go, I think it is always important as a timing-wise, and we need to take risk. But of course, we also evaluate the countries in some levels, so we don't even go every countries. But for example, we as a group were just starting a new business in Ukraine a month ago, just before this incident happened. So we could be there already and having this unfortunate crisis in the country. But we believe at the end it will get over. I mean, you have to wait, you have to take your risk, and it is the high return, I think, prescription. If you take your high risk with your precautions and with your right evaluations, you take it back in a long term. Thank you.
Thank you. I now request Ronnie to address us.
Can you hear me? Okay. I certainly agree with Mr. Bergman that the geopolitical situation is a very difficult one. That's something that we all should be worried about. You know, in my 60-some years, well, let's say 30, 40 years of watching the world, seldom do I see really so much change in the last couple of years. And those changes, as far as I'm concerned, have far-reaching implications for the generations to come. So let me just quickly make 3 points. The first one is what Rakesh, my friend Mohan, Dr. Mohan says, called the North Atlantic financial crisis, right? The second one on China and the third one on the Middle East. No doubt in the last couple of years we have watched a few things. Number one, Europe's problem of decades of over-socialism has been coming to the fore. And I don't think too many people today would expect a very optimistic view of the future of Europe. The United States, on the other hand, is truly amazing. 2 points. Number one, I think the United States is one of the very few countries that can really desegregate politics and business. In other words, in politics in Washington, D.C., you can fight as much as you want. They have the same problem because of populism, just like in Europe. But because the ability for the economy to be somewhat separated from the politics and still be able to run on its own. So let you guys in Washington, D.C. cause trouble. We in the rest of the country will do business as usual. That is something that I see very few countries around the world that can do. The only thing that comes close to it perhaps is India, in the sense that all my Indian business friends tells me that they succeed. I'm sorry, Ram, you are now part of the government. Tell me they succeed not because of the government, but in spite of the government. And so I have tremendous respect for my Indian business friends because in face of such hindrances, if you will, yet they have succeeded. But the other thing about the United States is that I think really geopolitically has changed the world forever, perhaps, is the energy self-sufficiency. The United States was strong not because of energy, the technology, the education, tremendous. But now, in addition to it, you have this energy self-sufficiency. I think the United States is just unmatched. Anybody who says that China is a competitor to the United States, as far as I'm concerned, come from Mars. Well, anyway, I don't want to go into too much detail. No one, just tell you one thing. A friend of mine who's an admiral, 3-star admiral, showed me on his aircraft carrier, and he said, Ronnie, I give this aircraft carrier to the Chinese and they won't be able to run it. I said, really? He said, why? He said, look at the young lady down there, 23-year-old, just graduated from college. And she's the one that directs all the flights that go in and out, right? And that lady makes the decision every, I don't know, 2 minutes or whatever, that is worth $500 million US. Because she has to decide whether the plane lands and it fails, so better take off again, or it lands. And I said, you know, I hate to see anybody denigrate Chinese so much, but you got a point. So anyway, enough said. So that's the United States. China, having said my word about China, I happen to believe that 7%, 8% growth for the next 10 years of China is very doable. My friend Al-Wali Singh, Dr. Montek Singh told us that India should be able to do 7.5 to 8. Right. And I think China should be able to do the same for the next 10, 15 years. They say, the difference is that China has been growing already for 20 years at that rate. But let me just give you a very simple three or four points why I think China can do that. Number one, urbanization is still ongoing. Still, you have 12 to 15 million people from the farming countries every year moving into the city. And everyone that goes into the city, every year they produce something like 10,000 RMB, so called called 1,800 US dollars of economic activities. And when you multiply it by 12, 15 million a year, it is a tremendous number. In the past, it has had even more, but now even for the at steady state level, for the next 10 years, if not longer, is 12 to 15 million. So urbanization is a powerful driver of the economy. Number two, the use of technology. Many of the Chinese companies, many people know me as a real estate guy. That I do. But many people don't know that once upon a time, I owned more factories than real estate projects in China. And the use of technology in the mainland of China is still, overall, still leaves a lot to be desired. I think that the usage of technology, you don't need to create technology. I'm just talking about the usage of it. It's going to bring efficiency and productivity up, and I think that will also create economic activities. The third one is, anybody who has done business in China knows it's an extraordinarily frustrating experience. Myself included, coming from Hong Kong, who speaks the language, no cultural barrier, a little cultural barrier. The irrationality in the system is humongous. And the removal of those irrationalities, I believe, in China should be sufficient to also become a driver of the economy. Then finally, let me offer you one other. A lot of people say China cannot rely on infrastructure development, public investment for economic growth. I said, think twice. Recently, I need to go from Shenyang in northeast China to Tianjin, a city not far from Beijing. Straight line, maybe, I don't know, 500-600 kilometers. So if there's a fast train, well, they're so famous for these fast trains that go 200 kilometers an hour. If you take a fast train, it takes 2.5 hours. I was in a hurry, and there's no flight that fits my schedule. I said, take the train. I found out that there's no train between Shenyang, which is a 7 million people city, to Beijing yet. And then from there to Tianjin, that's fast. But whatever the case is, for me to travel 500, 600 kilometers in two cities that one has 7 million people, the other has 10 million people, took me 9 hours by train. Eventually, I decided to drive. It's faster. So the last mile is always the most difficult. Whether you're talking about telecoms, optic fibers, gasoline, electricity, telephone, whatever, the last mile is the most difficult. And China, yes, Dr. Wang Huiyao said, Henry Wang said in the last session that they have 100,000 kilometers, the biggest in the world, all that stuff. But what they don't have is the last mile. And that is going to be tremendous. And so, whereas I'm not suggesting that China should forever rely on infrastructure development, public investment to drive economy, but the need there is still humongous. Of course, they will struggle in the interim to move, also supplement it with consumer spending and so forth. So I think that China should be doing okay. That's not my worry. Has always been on the social stability side of things rather than the economic side of things. My final point relates to the Middle East. A lot of people worry about China, Japan, all those islands, all that stuff, and I worry about it too. But I said before it blows up, most likely something in the Middle East is going to. Sorry, you'll see the president of Tel Aviv University standing right in front of me, Professor Klefter. I'm afraid that something in your part of the world is going to happen before something really bad happened in my part of the world. And let me tell you one thing that I think is a really interesting phenomenon. Israel found offshore gas. We don't know how big it is, but it's going to be pretty big. Golda Meir, the former prime minister, has a famous saying. She said, what the heck did Moses do, for I don't know how many years, 40 years led us through the whole circle around, and eventually led us to the only place in the Middle East that doesn't have oil. Well, unfortunately, she's no longer alive, but if she's alive, she should know that, no. God took you to the right place. They have offshore gas, and it's very, very big. So last week, 2 weeks ago, I was in Jerusalem. I was in Israel talking to some friends, and they were all trying to sell gas to China, and Japan, and Korea. Because as we know, oil price is uniform. It's basically one market in the world, but not gas price. There's a lot more, in Japan and China than in the United States, for example. And I said, oh, wait a second. You have offshore gas in the Mediterranean Sea. I think that in the future, selling to Europe is going to be a tremendous thing. Consider this. Europe has basically got out of the Middle East since 1948. The United Kingdom and France, right? United Kingdom out of Palestine, out of Egypt, out of Iraq, France out of Syria, Lebanon, and so forth. I think that for the first time, perhaps, the engagement of Europe with the Middle East, in particular with Israel, is going to be renewed because of energy. Think about this. Where does Israel get it? Where does Europe get its energy? Russia, West Africa, Middle East. Russia has proven itself again and again as an unreliable partner. I go to Ukraine every year, and in the wintertime, a lot of people freeze to death if the Russians were to turn off the pipe, and they did twice. And West Africa in itself is a rather unstable place, and it's very long distance. If Israel truly has offshore, well, not truly, not if, they do have offshore gas, there's no natural enemy to ship gas from Israel to Europe. I don't know, maybe offshore platform to gasify them. And, I was talking to David Petraeus, and he was saying how, well, you have terrorism problem. I said, yeah, terrorism, the danger is you don't know when they're going to strike, where they're going to strike, and how they're going to strike. But if you know where they're going to strike, then it's defendable. And let's face it, the Israeli Air Force is awesome. And so they should be able to defend that very, very well. And then through that, you ship it to southern Greece, to southern Italy, southern France, to Spain, and then go north from there. There's no natural enemy. The US Sixth Fleet is king. Why does Russia want Crimea? Of course, for the last 200 years, they've been trying to get a port, right? But they still have to pass through Turkey, the Bosphorus. So I think that, the Sixth Fleet is there, that is to ensure that the transportation is okay. So I think that the whole world is changing in front of our eyes just in the last 2 or 3 years, the likes of which is going to change our life and that of our children, especially because the United States is more self-sufficient now, energy, pretty soon. So perhaps the United States will have a little bit less reason to be involved in the Middle East, just like since 1948. The gap that the Europeans left behind was filled by the United States because of energy mainly, and the Jewish issue. And I believe that now, as the United States begin to retreat a little bit from the Middle East, I think that role will again be filled partly by Europe. So I think the whole Middle East situation is certainly not getting simpler. Certainly, it is getting more and more complicated. So my final point is this. My final point is, I just don't know what's the future of Saudi Arabia. I mean, I wish we have somebody here from Saudi Arabia. They should be part of the growth net. I said, Saudi Arabia, for thousands of years, nobody gave a damn about, the desert. It was really in 1933, you'll see, 32. Maybe 33, that John D. Rockefeller Jr. went to, because of the geology, they found oil, and struck a deal with the king of the father of the present king. Right. And in 1937-38, they began to pump oil. But that oil price was cheap. So it was really not until 73 and 79, with the 2 oil shocks, that Saudi Arabia began to rise. Well, now, and the main positive function in the world is really to adjust energy prices. When it's high, they sell more. When it's low, they don't sell. They have 19% of the world's oil, and together with the United States, they become the moderator, the adjuster of oil prices. But now, with the United States being self-sufficient, and with Israel finding offshore gas, I just don't know what's a function of Saudi Arabia. And I told my friends in Saudi Arabia, I said, hey, you guys and the Israelis should get together. You have a common enemy called Iran, And so, I mean, the whole world is changing so much in front of our face. And, so maybe we see the rise of Saudi Arabia in the middle of the 20th century, maybe at the beginning of the 21st century, you see the wane of a country as far as its economic function in the world is concerned. However, let's not for a moment think that Saudi Arabia will no longer be an important country. I come from East Asia. You go talk to my friends in Malaysia. Michael, you are here. You talk to my friends in Indonesia. Who funds all the schools? Who funds all the fundamentalism, fundamental Islamism? We all know where it comes from. And then, of course, that in addition to that is a Shiite Sunni situation. Wow, I mean, that is big-time problem. And so no one should underestimate the significance of Saudi Arabia in the world today, but perhaps as an economic a moderator of the economy, perhaps of the global economy through the energy price, maybe we're seeing the waning part of it. And Israel, a small country, always a center of the world in many ways, perhaps will again become even more important as you discover offshore gas on your west side, that is the eastern part of the Mediterranean. So anyway, that's my view of a view of the global landscape is a title of this topic. I give you my view.
Thank you, Ronnie. That was a very interesting view. Wendy?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to bring Africa's voice to the discussions over the next 2 days. Let me begin by saying that our generation is witnessing the most atrocious and rising levels of economic inequality that have been seen in recent times. So this is the issue that I want to add to the other, I guess, observations that have been shared. You may ask why is economic inequality of relevance to a discussion on economic growth and reversing the tide? Well, it's important for a number of reasons because of its political and economic consequences, including the issue of social and moral concerns that it impacts on society. We should be concerned about it for a number of reasons. But before we do that, let's look at what does economic inequality mean. So I'd like to look at that. I'd like to look at what it means. I'd like to look at what consequences it has on society. And I'd also like to look at why should we care? Why does it matter? In terms of its definition, I want to borrow from Amartya Sen's definition, who begins by defining equality. And he defines equality as an equality of capability to function fully as a human being. He goes on further to say that such capability entails survival, it entails access to health, it entails access to freedom and knowledge, otherwise described as education, and it entails the ability for human beings to choose their life path and to have access to resources to pursue that path. So if we accept Amartya's definition, therefore, of inequality, let's look at what would inequality look like. It refers to multidimensional barriers to human functioning in the world, which ultimately amount to human violations. He suggests that it affects society in a number of ways. Firstly, it impacts on society through vital inequality, which leads to inequalities regarding health and life expectancy. Secondly, it impacts on society through resource inequality, which leads to economic inequality that we're all familiar with. And it explains, to a large extent, the large levels of poverty that we see in the world. Thirdly, it leads to existential inequality, which we see, for example, in the unresolved debate on gender. The fact that men have more access to opportunities than women do, or to the issue of race, that certain racial groupings have more access to opportunities than other racial groupings. Why should we care about it? For a number of reasons. Firstly, the illegitimacy of today's capitalism, which some refer to as the casino economy, not the real economy. Many amongst the 1% derive their wealth from connections, they derive their wealth from gambling, they derive their wealth from sidestepping existing norms and regulations in society, and the rest derive their wealth from the stock exchange. It is not from productive, real economy. So that's the first reason why we should care about it. Secondly, economic inequality creates a society of less privileged and unfortunate class of people, as well as growing numbers of people who do not have a chance to develop their capabilities. Thirdly, there is a mounting human, moral, and a social cost that we have not yet quantified. So we're quite happy to look at the benefits that growth will accrue to society, but we're not looking at the other side of the equation. What is the human cost to society? And I'd like to argue that this is something that we want to consider. For example, we live at a time currently where the levels of trust in society have never been at their lowest. Low levels of trust between capital and labor, low levels of trust between governments and civil society. And what is the impact of all of those developments? So I think that I'd like to conclude by just suggesting that the challenge of our time, the challenge of our generation, is really to begin to look at the rising level of economic inequality on society and the impact of that, particularly from a human cost point of view. Because if we don't, we're going to leave a future for our grandchildren that is really depleted. You know, so the conversations that we're having over the next 2 days about how we revive growth has to take place in the context of the impact that the growth actually leaves behind on society and leaves behind on the ground. Because if we don't do that, we are creating a situation where we are increasingly, those of us who have access to resources and who have access to wealth are increasingly at risk. Not the majority of the people who are excluded from economic participation, but those of us who are beneficiaries are going to be increasingly at risk.
Wendy, do you have any suggestions?
Excuse me?
Do you have any suggestions for this problem?
Well, that's what the next 2 days, I think, should explore.
Stay tuned.
We'll have to wait patiently. Ram, please. And Ram, if I saw you taking notes while Wendy was talking, if you have any comments on this subject, I'd appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I think I was taking down the notes just to see, did any of the speakers miss out anything what I wanted to say. Since they have covered everything, my job becomes easy. One is, in anything which we talk about, one of the things we have learned over the years is how to implement on the ground, which we talked about again and again, even in the earlier sessions. If at all the IT industry from this country is one of the global players and it has created a global impact, employing almost 3 million professionals and employing indirectly another 10 million people, it's purely because of the implementation and execution capabilities, which means from strategy through implementation has to be virtually in real time and must be integrated together. Till the action on the ground takes place, you have not made that connection. And even when she talked about the inequality, when you have a beneficiary to be finally delivering the services to, which in a number of cases is the role of the government, whether it's education or health or even agriculture. How are we going to deliver what we promised and don't promise what we cannot deliver? That's the mantra we have practiced right through, which leads to opportunities not in your geography alone, but in any part of the world. You've got to look at the world as a market, because the connectivity today, you can access any part of the world in real time. And that's what we are witnessing, whether it's through the social media, whether it's through the mobile, whether it's through analytics, or whether it's through the cloud. So the disruption that is taking place and the changes that are taking place are immense, and they are happening at such an accelerated pace. The people who are transacting are not the people who are in this room, but the younger population which wants to do completely opposite of what we have done ever in the past. So I think, are we ready for those disruptions, and are we willing to take those challenges? And the innovation comes into picture. That is where the universities like yours play a very important role. So I think we have to connect all of these forces together to say that from innovation through strategy to deployment on the ground, and how do you make it happen with the kind of infrastructure that is available. When we talk about government's role of giving the infrastructure and the money that is coming in for that, it's the end application for which it is needed, rather than simply saying that infrastructure is not there and infrastructure needs to be there. And I think the inequality is very, very visible across the world, and it's not restricted to one country or the other. Even the US situation, we talked about the inequality as part of the discussion in our table. I think that's the biggest challenge, and that's the biggest worry. How are we going to deliver so that everyone has an equal opportunity across the world? I think the reimagination of every business, including every part of the government, has to be thought through. And the reimagination is because of the digital forces that are at work. And I think every single business, every single government has to think of reimagining through the digital footprint. And how do you make it happen continuously with the same level of service transparently? That's where the corruption and all can be minimized. I think we have seen in our own country, whether it is the delivery of health services, the primary health care predominantly, or education, which is going to be transformed totally, including the vocational education. We are talking about scale problems here, because in a country like India, where the demographic profile is the 15 to 24 age group is about 67% of the population, and we are talking on a 1.2 billion population. The crucial delivery in terms of 15 to 18 million kids coming to the job stream every year, how are we going to educate them? How are we going to vocationally provide the kind of technical capabilities to them to do something with hands-on? And create the necessary jobs at the end of the day, because simply skilling is not enough, because you need to create the jobs or entrepreneurship, which is going to be very, very visible. These are some things which are trying to address, and we have got to disrupt, because you cannot have the infrastructure, you cannot have the classrooms, you cannot have the teachers. So how to create one teacher to many students? How do you use the power of technology so that everyone has equal access? How do you use the collaboration between the students themselves for their own betterment and their own capabilities? I think everywhere all of us need to think disruption, but the opportunities are immense. If an industry like the IT industry, which touches not only the have, but also the education, as I talked about, or the health I talked about, we are growing at about 15 to 18% in this day and era, when the whole world is in a situation of, we are talking about lack of growth or how to revive the growth. And when we talk about a 15 to 18% growth with a profitability of about average 15 to 20% margins, net margins, all I can say is there is plenty of opportunities for everyone. And if you know your business and reinvent your business and reimagine your business, there are multiple things you can do. But you must have the capacity and the will to have the leadership and also invest fearlessly, because that's what Silicon Valley does day in and day out. That's what other parts of the world are trying to get into the situation. The availability of capital for innovation, availability for startup initiatives in terms of capital is very fundamental. Even social transformations are absolutely necessary, including ecological and economic sustainability together. I think we have to look at every part of what we do holistically rather than what is in it for me or what is the minimal amount I can touch. Once you get that kind of a mindset, I think we in Tatas believe in it. We in Tatas do both social initiatives, community initiatives, as well as profitable businesses across the world. And as a group, we employed more than 400,000 professionals. And we do more than $100 billion in revenues, of which the consulting part of it is about a $13 billion business with a market cap of about $65 billion, employing about 300,000 professionals. So I think if the economy grows at about 8% or 7% on a sustained basis, all I can see is only more opportunities, and my only worry would be, where are we going to find those talent or the capabilities to deliver on the ground? So every investment must be towards building the capacity and building capabilities. More importantly, the skilling and talent management, which becomes the role of leadership, and that's where we have shortages today. If at all there is one missing element in whatever we talk about, it's the leadership. How do you build that leadership? How do you give opportunities for a lot of people to build that leadership capabilities? Thank you.
Thank you. Stan, you said if we had a little time, you'd tell us why you're optimistic.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Goodrich. First of all, Wendy, I think your issue of trust is a very valid concern. And I think the responsibility to address trust lies with governments, NGOs, and business in creating public-private partnerships, because public-private partnerships are the way to get things done. And so I think business people have to have a commitment to get engaged. The second point you made about inequality, I'd have to say that that is one of my biggest concerns. It's not good enough to have a part of the population doing well. You have to bridge the gap, or in the end you will have social unrest. There's no question about it. But where my optimism lies, it is in the contribution of the developing world to the world economy. Take a look at any Fortune 500, any Fortune 1000 company that is multinational, and they mostly are. You will see that the growth in these companies is coming from the developing world. Right. And where is it coming from? It's coming from the growth in the middle class. Now, the bottom part of the pyramid is getting worse. It's true, and we have to address it. Having said that, the middle class is growing, and the middle class in the world is growing and doing well. The second part of the equation is that the baby boomers throughout the world, the most affluent and educated generation ever, are spending more money. Now, there are issues, certainly in countries like Japan, where the elderly are growing at a faster rate than the economy can sustain the social costs. But in the end, when a business is looking, such as mine, we provide dental products, medical and veterinary products, we look at the growing middle class, which is educated and has plenty of money. So the other area that gives me a lot of optimism is the growth in entrepreneurship. There is not a country in the world, and by the way, even though there is a lot of state-run enterprise in China, the rate of entrepreneurial activity in China is mind-boggling. In every single sector, except there are a few, perhaps, that the government is sensitive about, entrepreneurship is rampant. The other area that gives me a lot of excitement is technology and the digitalization of our world, and in particular in healthcare. The business models have not been worked out. But if you take an example in my field of dentistry, today it is possible to have a digitalized impression, send it digitally to a machine that will mill a crown or bridge chairside. And it can be done at a fraction of the cost. Right. The question is, how is it going to be reimbursed? The opportunity, for example, in the X-ray world, to take a digital X-ray in New York and have it read in India at a fraction of the cost. The problem here with the whole digitalization of healthcare, including home care, is the business models have not developed of how to sustain this, and they will. And then the question of women and disparity. yes, every time we add a woman into the workforce, we create economic activity. And yes, women have not made the progress that they should. And yes, women are paid less than they should. Having said that, if you take a look at the average dental school, medical school, nursing school, veterinary school in the West, you will find the majority of graduates are women. Not only that, but you will see that the majority of graduates come from homes that are not necessarily wealthy. So yes, there are a lot of issues here. And yes, I think we cut ourselves short by not encouraging more women in the workforce. But there is progress. And so I remain quite optimistic with all these things taken into account. Just, we need the governments to give us a platform where they're not going to go to war too quickly.
Right. Canan, could you tell us a little bit about what lessons you learned in Turkey that helped you in other developing countries?
Let me take this again. I think the most important part was, as I described with my previous speech, you really need to be updated with the development in your own country, because the things, when I say it is changing or it is sometimes as a crisis, in Turkey we really had lots of crises in our sector, not only economy, because of our surrounding countries. As you know, we were facing lots of terrorism issues, which you can never judge when it is going to happen. So it really affects suddenly your business, because as I mentioned as well, I remember, Turkey is a tourism country, so because of that, when there is any activity taking place, the business stops tremendously in a very short notice. So actually this is one thing, and second thing, what actually you face in the different countries as we are right now, you are very much bound on the governmental body's decision, because our business is very high security business as well, because we are working at the airports. That's why lots of actually governmental bodies involved in our process, and the decision they need to take time to time to progress the business services. It takes very, very long time. So you actually, sorry to say for governmental people, but you need to train actually governmental people for your business. Because especially in Turkey, because the government was changing so quickly, even though some level of course, bureaucrats stays in the same place, but because of their negligence on the foreign language, because of their no interest, maybe the technical side of the business and improvement, you really need to go and try to give them lots of information, how the things need to be developed in the country. So this is something actually you continuously try to do in every new developed countries, which we try to do. We believe that this is our duty. And because in our sector, again, there are not too many private sectors, so you cannot really gather a group of people as a private companies to go and talk to governmental bodies. So you have to do all this by yourself and try to give them trust, try to give them that you are not actually trying to emphasize something just for your company. It is good for the country, it is good for the actually business. So you are bringing actually know-how to business. Because many years, also in Turkey, we need to compete with governmental companies. because there was one private company as Celebi. We are the first private company in Turkey in our grant handling business. And when I say grant handling, I have to emphasize my father started the business. He was ex-Turkish Air Force pilot. And when he retired by his wishes in 26 years of age, he actually worked for a while at the airport, and later he decided to open this business. And how? With 5 workers and 1 passenger stairs. This was our complete establishment. And all his life, he really fought with the government. Because government always thought, as some of the, I think, speaker today said, that the private company is the threat for the company, for the country, because they are stealing money. I mean, why we are stealing money as a private company, you don't know, but the government was showing, thinking that this was it. So he had to fight all his life against the government to prove that he needs to stay in this business, and we did. So you do understand that governmental people, bureaucracy, you really need to be patient, and you have to give them lots of information from all over the world to convince them that they need to change something in the country. And the last, you have to really invest first, then earn money. I mean, there is no way you can really judge that you earn money at the same time you start the business. So in our business, for example, to get your return takes sometimes 5 to 7 years. But whenever the policies, like in India, for example, in 2009, when we came here, the policy was actually decided to issue. And 5 years, we are still waiting that policy to be implemented. So we already made $100 million investment in India, and we are still believing India very much, as I said. So patience is very important, but of course, at the end, we are, private companies, so we have our limits of waiting. But none of the thing happens in one day. I think this is also what we have taken from our own country. If you wait enough, if you fight enough, you really, at the end, come to the conclusion with the success. Thank you.
I would like to open it up for questions from the audience, if there are any. Please.
Hello? Yes, very interesting. I'm totally confused by now, but that's good, because if you are not confused, it's because you are not well informed. And we had many interesting interpretations about the main challenges. I just want to raise the question of inequality from a different perspective. And as Ms. mentioned, we'll have more 2 days to discuss this. But one country that was not in the panel was Brazil. In 1989, Brazil had a Gini coefficient, which is an indicator of inequality of 0.63, which is exactly the one of South Africa nowadays, which is the 3rd most unequal country in the world. Now, between 1989 and today, Brazil was able to make a major progress. Inequality is still extremely high, around 0.52, but it's one country where you had a decline that has no parallel in the history. So the obvious question then is, what did Brazil do that allow it to accomplish this? But more importantly, is this sustainable? Because some people would argue that the model that Brazil used to allow this significant decline in inequality is not sustainable. So it's more a question for our the panel and for our debates later. But I have one specific question for Mr. Schein. I found very interesting the proposition that the American captain, admiral, whatever, was willing to give the carrier to China because China could not find somebody to operate the same way that the young lady that is operating the takeoffs and landing. How come, since China nowadays, if we look, for instance, at the PISA educational surveys, cities like Shanghai and Beijing are the very top of the educational achievements in the world. So why China cannot find a 23 years old that will get that kind of capability?
Well, perhaps precisely because of the educational system. The Chinese do very well in, primary school, junior high, high school, in subjects such as math and science, right? But how much of that is rote learning, and how much of that is really training people how to think? And the whole point that that admiral said to me was that the Chinese, everything they have to seek guidance from above. Whereas that 23-year-old young lady has no chance to seek any guidance because every 2 minutes she has to make a decision worth however many. And so the Chinese, the whole cultural history of China has a predisposition against inquiry, against free thinking and so forth. And that is something that the Chinese have to grapple with. Now, the good thing is that they have 1.36 billion people. So out of that, you're bound to have some free-thinking individuals, and even some that don't mind to speak up, because Chinese don't usually speak up. And ladies and gentlemen, I am Chinese, at least ethnic Chinese. So I think that, and by the way, who says that every nation must gravitate toward the Western style of education? Because everything in this world has pluses and minuses. That which is good has its bad, and that which is bad has its good. So I think that we should not assume that the Chinese necessarily will need to have an educational system that is as free-thinking as in the West. But nonetheless, I think it behooves the Chinese to think along that line in order for them to train people who are more and more free-thinking and dynamic in their thoughts. Tonight, arriving here today, is a gentleman by the name of Lin Bin. He will be speaking, I think, tomorrow. People like him, 30, 40-year-old, founded a company called Xiaomi, which is now competing head-on with Apple, at least in China. And the company is something like 10 to 15 billion US dollars worth today. You know, these young people like that are rising. It's just a matter of, well, but then you have to balance. If everybody is too free-thinking without the rule of law like you do have in the West, you have a problem too. And let's face it, China's rule of law is still weak. And so if everybody is too free-thinking, you have a problem. So I think that the balance has to be struck at any one time, and hopefully it moves in the right direction.
Ronnie, there's a lot of talk of reform in China. Do you think reform is necessary? Do you think it will happen?
Well, put it this way. When you move, okay, in the 1960s and 70s, I say China was so leftist that they make Khrushchev look like his middle name is Thatcher. That was how left the Chinese was. And then out of the blue, in 1978, 79, it began to change. And today, I can argue easily that China is a far more capitalistic country than the United States. Mm-hmm. It is like the robber baron days of the beginning of the 20th century USA. And so the range of where China has traveled over the last 30-some years is tremendous. So the dislocation there is humongous, and that's always fraught with danger, socially speaking. But that said, your question is, do they need to reform? Well, when you move so fast, so much in so short a period of time, you better have systems that can guide it in a better way. If not, it just go chaos. And so they are using administrative measures while buying themselves time to reform. So a lot of people accuse the Chinese for not reforming fast enough. Well, it's easy for you to prescribe medicine when you don't even know the problem of the patient. And that's exactly what the West is oftentimes telling the Chinese what to do. So I think the Chinese have to find their own way, reforming while preserving enough social stability so that whatever has been achieved will not dissipate. So that is a very dangerous, a very difficult process, as well as a very dangerous one, socially speaking.
But you think they'll undertake it slowly?
Oh, one thing no one should do is underestimate the intelligence of the leaders of Beijing. These guys are not stupid. And I know every one of them, the top leaders. And they know what they need to do. But they also know something that we don't know, and that is, in so doing, in introducing reform, what danger there is in society. And so they have to balance the two. And so sometimes they look very reformist, like Zhu Rongji. The reality is, Zhu Rongji is a former premier, was a very conservative man. He was forced by circumstance to reform. And so I think China would undulate between reform and faster and slower reform. Whether they'll make it or not, I don't know. I'm not God, so who can tell? The last one that can tell probably are the leaders of China itself. So take it a step at a time. Let's all wish them well. If not, frankly, it's not a good thing for the world if China gets into trouble.
Stan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, let me just pick up from where Ron ended. Chinese entrepreneurship is alive and well. You can go to Shanghai and Beijing, you can see stuff. Go to those 100 cities of 3 or 4 or 5 million people, where 20 years or 10 years ago, these were agricultural fields in the middle of nowhere. You see 30-story buildings, and these buildings are full, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So, you know, whether they can take the plane off or not, I don't know about what the general said, but I compete with the Chinese, I buy in China, and I do a lot of business there, and the Chinese are very good business people and know what they're doing. The second point I'd like to make addresses the question on Brazil. And Brazil is a great story, and I'm referring to the period of President Lula, where President Lula cut a deal with business. Yes, he was on the left, but he cut a deal with business, and he said, I will tax you at a reasonable rate. Not very high, but a reasonable rate. You pay the taxes, and let me distribute that money to people in the area of social services. Mm-hmm. It worked extremely well. I don't want to comment on the current Brazilian government, but I think President Lula did a very good job in cutting a deal with business, with the NGO world, and it worked. And people did not expect that. They thought here was a very left-wing president that would really impact business. And business did well. There are challenges today, but that's a separate thing. You asked why Brazil did well, and they did well for a 5 or 6 year period of time because of good government, good governance. People paid tax.
Some of the best governments have been business-like left-wing governments.
Absolutely, no question.
Last question, and then we have to close. A quick question, please.
Thank you. I just have a question for Mr. Bergman. Mr. Chan mentioned that finding gas in the US would be a game changer. And you have a good environment for innovation, business, and technology, very good educational institutes, and now you have gas. So what is your take as a US businessman? What do you think is going to change in the next 5–10 years with this finding of gas in the United States?
Well, I think the US is moving towards self-sustainability in the area of energy. And we may even be close to that now. So I think that net. And in the,
what does it do to the US?
What it does to the US, and the further advances the US makes in the energy area, whether it's in different kinds of alternative sources of energy, will have a huge impact. And I think we're heading in that direction. Fast enough? Not sure. But that's very good. My concern with the United States at the very moment, and again, I told you earlier on, I'm left. My concern with the United States now is the government's lack of appreciation of business. And yes, there's a lot of dialogue. But if you look at the government itself, you take a look at the cabinet, there are very few business people in there. And my concern is the amount of legislation that's being passed. We are dealing with matters. Yes, there were challenges in 2008. There were banks that didn't do the right thing. It wasn't because there was a shortage of regulation. It was because there was not good oversight. The net result is we have a plethora of legislation in every single area, and I think that is going to impact business. I think over time America will self-correct, but my concern is too much bureaucracy and too much legislation and too much requirements. The amount of forms, filings that we as a public company have to fulfill today is unbelievable. And the amount of people we need to employ to fill these forms out is just unbelievable. And I think we need to move towards more, to an environment that is far more business friendly. And I think it will adjust. Doesn't mean we shouldn't take care of social issues. We should. But we need social issues taken care of while we take care of the ability for business to do business. And as President Kennedy said, the business of America is business.
Stan, we thought that India had a problem with difficulty.
Come sit in my office for a while.
Join the club.
You'll see the forms that we have to fill out.
Can I try to answer that very quickly?
Quick point.
Very quickly. I think the United States may become once again the manufacturing base of the world, just like it once was in the 50s and 60s. Think about it this way, and this is my last sentence. You need 4 or 5 things for manufacturing. You need labor, you need energy, you need raw material, you need money, right?
Technology.
And then you need technology. The United States have technology. The United States have all the natural resources. The United States has all the capital. Labor now with 3D printing and the robotics and so forth, no longer as important as before. And then the last thing is you need energy. And now the United States is energy self-sufficient. So all 5 elements that you need to be a manufacturing base right there in the United States. So I think that the United States may once again become a center of manufacturing, in which case China better wean itself of the cheap labor. Mexico better get its act together. Right. Thank God they're doing a little bit better now. So I think that too is going to change the world.
Very good. I think on that excellent note, we can end the session.
It's a lot of fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, drinks are ready for you just outside across the hall in Durbar Ballroom, and we will be coming back in here for dinner. Thank you.